much for joining by Zoom and negotiating the various things that you had to negotiate to get here. And I hope you can hear. Please, you can write in the chat if you're having problems, and we can see what we can do about it. The chat should be, little box should be down the bottom. And there'll be time for question and answers at the end, but I'm just going to turn over to Mark and to Tom, whatever order they're doing it in. I think, Mark, you're on first. And welcome, all of you. So, Mark, over to you.
Great, thanks, Irene, and welcome, everybody. It's really nice to see some old friends. I'm thinking it's great to see Jim and Steph up in Townsville, and Chris, and several folk I haven't seen for a while, and friends that I see more regularly, and I'll probably see at church later. So lovely to be here. Thank you. It's one of the advantages of Zoom is people can sign in from all over the place. Yeah, so just the normal kind of Zoom protocols. If you stay on mute until such time as we ask you questions, and then unmute so that you can answer them or ask questions yourself. And if you want to leave your video on, you're very welcome. And if you want to leave it off, you're also welcome. So I'm just going to share the screen here, and hopefully you'll all be able to see that. So Irene, can you just indicate to me that you can see that okay? Give me a thumbs up.
Good, yep.
Yep, great. So Tom and I are here. Tom's about a foot away from me, but on his computer. So this is where we're going this afternoon in the next 40 minutes. So first of all, a very brief introduction to Tom and myself, because some of you don't know us terribly well. Some of you know us all too well. But yeah, so a very brief introduction. Then Tom's going to take over and give you a real life dilemma that he's faced in India pretty recently, that of underage marriage of a young woman, and ask the question of you, what would you do? Because this is a dilemma that he has faced in India recently in the pandemic. Then it's going to come back to me. So we're going to, Tom and I are going to alternate a fair bit. Then it's going to come back to me. I'm going to talk briefly about what damage has been done with colonial style development over the years. So this is top-down stuff where we know everything and you don't know anything and we come to save you. What damage comes from that, and what's the critique of that? Just to be clear of what we're trying to not do. Right? Then Tom's going to take over again. He's got a little set of verses for us to look at. We're going to go into breakout rooms, and we're going to give you a verse to look at to come up with some principles that Jesus might suggest about how to do development and stuff better. Then we're going to go back to the original underage marriage case study and have a look at what Tom actually did in the end in that very tricky situation. And then have a look at another case study about people really just running out of food in India during this pandemic. And again, he's got some questions for you about what would you do in this situation. So despite the Zoom, we're going to try really hard to get you guys to do some work. And then I'm going to talk about what does all of this mean for us in Australia now, this a post-colonial way of doing things. What does this mean for us here and now? Because it's all very well hearing these stories from India, but we want some principles that we can apply here and now in Australia or Townsville or wherever you are. Then we've got a question and answer time for about 15, 20 minutes. And then at the end of it all, when we're done, we've got a little form for you to fill out. Very simple. What did you think of today? What did you like? What didn't you like? And so forth. If you could fill that out to just get some feedback, that'd be great. So we're going to be talking for about 40 minutes. And then there's about 15, 20 minutes of questions. And that's about it. We'll be done in about an hour. All right, so into a very brief introduction to Tom and I. So top left of your screen is me and my wife, Kathy. Many of you will know Kathy. She's in the purple there. So we've lived in India for many years, on and off for about 20 years. We've chosen to live very deliberately in quite poor neighbourhoods that some Australians might call a slum. Or you might call it an informal colony. So bottom right is a colony we lived in Delhi, which is informal, it's illegal, so it's built on government land, a piece of property about the size of the Gabba cricket ground, if you can imagine that, home to about 60 or 70,000 people. So living very, very cramped quarters, not too many facilities and so forth. We've deliberately chosen to live in places like that so that we can understand what life is like for the poor. Yeah, so we've done that for a long time. Here's our family, if you don't know our family. So Tom, who's on the screen there and is waving to you, so Tom's 25, then my wife Kathy, and then our young bloke Oscar is 20, and then me. And where Kathy and I are in Australia now to get Oscar underway at university. Tom has just joined us about 6 weeks ago after the last 4 years in India. So he's been right through the COVID stuff that's gone on in India. So he's having a little break, and then all going well, Kathy and I and Tom will head back to India in late April, and we'll get back into it. What did we do when we were in India? Well, a range of things. We tried to set our agenda for what we did on what people were interested in and what they wanted. So in one slum, there was it was under threat of demolition by the government. The Delhi government, in its wisdom, wanted to bulldoze the slum that we were living in. So in that slum, it was a legal battle in the Delhi High Court to try to get people secure land to build their houses on. Tom has also been heavily involved recently in literacy. So top left there, you'll see Tom and also Oscar teaching kids how to read and write, not English, but Hindi. So their mother tongue, of course, they're fluent speaking wise, but they could not read and write very well. So Tom's been helping many, many kids, Tom and his colleagues, hundreds of kids in the last couple of years, how to read and write their own language so that they can better engage in school. Another thing that I've done for many years is bottom right, is I've put together manuals for how people can access government services that are available to them more easily. So widows' pensions, gas connections, things like that.
Yeah, I can hear it.
That's kind of become my speciality.
Finally can see it.
All right, so now I'll hand over to Tom to give a little case study.
Hey, thanks, Mark. And it's fantastic to see all of you guys. Like Mark said, many old friends and new friends as well.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess we wanted to throw open this study with an example from life in India, because basically what we're wanting to discuss today is questions around power. So as foreigners living in India, we have a lot of power because we're white-skinned, because we are white-skinned, because we're educated, because we're wealthy. So we have a lot of power. So the question is, what do we do with that? And we're looking at this through the lens of colonialism and postcolonialism, because colonialism is obviously a big abuse of power, which we do not want to reproduce. But yeah, we're thinking about how to use our power in a more constructive way. So this is the example that I want to get us started off thinking about, which happened to me about 3 months ago while I was in Lucknow, where one of the families who I'm very good friends with, their 15-year-old daughter called me up one day in tears, and she said, Tom, Yusuf is my older name, she said, Yusuf, my mum and my brother, my older brother, are trying to marry me off, and they've arranged my marriage for next month to a guy who lives nearby, and they want me married for a variety of reasons, because it's quite conservative cultural norms there. Quite often, women get married before 18, the girls are married, and also because they were feeling the economic pinch, and they were viewing her as a burden on the family. And a variety of reasons they wanted to get her married. And she called me up in tears and said, stop it, do something to stop it. So this was a very complex and tricky situation for me as a white male and as a close friend of this family. How do I interact with this situation where there's a plea for help, but it's complex cultural issues involved around what's a good age for marriage and what are the roles that women are expected to play in society. And here I am as a white male, what do I do in that position? Okay. Just check that this is okay.
Back to the original.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you still hear Tom? Okay.
Just checking that. we're having a few.
Irene, just tell us you can hear Tom okay?
Yeah, is that right?
Yep.
Cool. So you can click through a few slides. So yeah, so I want to describe the situation very briefly to you. I know it's a very brief description, but I would like you guys to just consider what you might do in that situation. If you were there in India, good friends with this family, their daughter's asking you for help to stop the marriage, what would you do? What would be your go-to response? And I'll ask you to just pop this in the chat box. And I want to say again, there's no right or wrong answer here. It is a very tricky situation. But yeah, just to get us thinking around these issues of power and responsibility and privilege and what do we do with it all, cultural differences. So yeah, I put a few options up on screen. So option one, step back from the situation. It's too complex to do anything. These are deep cultural differences around marriage, around gender roles. And so it's just too difficult for me as a white person to say anything or do anything in the situation. Option two, try to convince the family that it's not a good idea. So try to persuade them that she's not mature enough, there's dangers of teenage pregnancy, etc. Option three, call an Indian friend to see if they can convince the family. So maybe I'm not able to do much myself, but maybe an Indian friend might be able to help. And option four, call the police to try to stop the marriage because it is illegal in India to get married under 18. So yeah, I realize I've only given a very brief description of the situation, but I would just like you to imagine yourself in that position. What would be your kind of gut go-to response? If your friend has called you up, 15-year-old girl, she's asking you for help, but you're not sure what to do, what would be your go-to response? So if you can just put that in the chat box, just as you can just put it as a 1, 2, 3, or 4, or you can add a comment there as well if you like. That would be great.
So if you know how to use the chat box, it's down the bottom there. If you just click on that and then you type your answer in there, you can just put a 1, 2, 3, or 4, or you can type something else. And then we'll just get people's responses about what they do.
Okay, so Jim has said 2 and 3. Yeah, try to convince people and also involve an Indian friend. Approach the parents and ask them to help you understand. Yeah, that's right. So that's kind of option 2. Yeah, talk with an Indian friend. Explore how to chat with the family. Is there an agency such as IGM that can help her? Yeah, these are all excellent suggestions. Excellent ways of thinking about this issue. Yeah, very good. Keep going, everybody. So yeah, like I said, there's no right or wrong answer. 3 for advice and then 2. Yeah, so good suggestion. So yeah, we're generally going for, not many people are saying call the police straight off the bat, and not many people are saying step back and do nothing, but some combination of trying to convince them yourself and also involving an Indian friend. Yeah, it's very good.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, great. 3 without trying to convince. Okay, yeah. So, okay, great. So that's good to warm up our thinking around these issues of power, of cultural difference, what's our role as a white person in a non-white society. Find out about other situations and how they might have been resolved. Yeah, excellent. Great, so I'll hand it back to Mark then to look a bit more at the broader picture, the theoretical underpinnings then of what we're discussing today.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And we're going to come back to that case study in a little while, and Tom's going to tell you what he actually did to respond to that. So now I just want to spend a couple of minutes recognising what's the problem of a colonial style development. So just to unpack that a little bit, what does that mean? Well, it means in that style of development, we feel like we know the truth and other people don't. We've got a monopoly on the truth and we're going to go and tell people the truth, right? That's kind of an underpinning assumption. It's also that we know what has to happen for people to be lifted out of poverty. We're the experts, you're not, you don't know stuff. We're going to go and, we're going to be the experts and we're going to lift you out of poverty. So these are the types of assumptions that kind of undergirded development for a long, long time. Now, what's the damage from that style of development? Well, it's very, very disempowering, right? For someone to come in from the outside, and we know this from our own lives, right? If someone comes in and says, I'm the expert, and just sit down, shut up and do what I say, it's very, very disempowering. It creates dependency. And it can even create this thing that you might have heard of called rice Christians, where people will say, oh yes, I'll believe whatever you tell me to believe as long as I get this food, this rice that you're going to give me, right? And that's where rice Christians comes from. So very disempowering. Another big problem out of it is Christianity is seen as a foreign religion. It's the religion of the white people. It's not ours. We might say that we follow this religion to get stuff from you, but deep down, we don't actually believe it. We're not following it. So Christianity is seen as a foreign religion, which is so sad, right? When basically Jesus is Middle Eastern and it started in the Middle East. It's so sad that in the last couple of centuries, it's become seen as this white person's religion. So what's the post-colonial alternative to that style of development? Well, it's recognizing that God and truth is present in every culture. We don't have a monopoly on the truth or on God. Every single culture in the world, God is present in those cultures. And every single culture in the world has aspects of the truth. We might have some, but those other cultures have some too. So it becomes very important to listen and learn from people rather than just talk and teach. Also recognizing that the poor actually know what's best for themselves, right? As we know, when we have a problem of any sort, we are the greatest expert in our own problem. We've lived with it for a long time. We've explored ideas. So too for the poor. They've lived with that insecurity for a long, long time, and they've got ideas about how to get out of poverty. And so our job becomes to listen to people and work with people. And also the post-colonial perspective would say that a lot of poverty is about structural change. It's about deeply embedded systems of injustice that the West has contributed to or even created. And so it's not just about coming in and giving people stuff, but it's about changing those inherently unjust structures. So, but where I guess Tom and I are saying today, the difficulty with that, those perspectives, which we agree on, absolutely, but the difficulty can be that we can throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And the difficulty can be that we can have a tendency to walk away from the mess that we've created and saying, well, sorry, we created this terrible mess in the developing world with these attitudes, so we're just going to walk away now and do nothing, right? So we're suggesting that that is a really inappropriate solution. If you've created the mess, you also need to be a part of trying to fix the mess up. So walking away, we'd suggest is not a great option, but it's one that we hear from many people these days. People say, well, why are you in India? What are you doing there? What right do you have to be there? You should not be there. Go home and just don't be there. Well, we would suggest that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And we would suggest that we still do, as Westerners, as white people, or as people from the West, we still do have some things to offer, right? If we do it in a good way, in a humble way, where we listen and so forth. So yeah, we still have got things to offer. So that's a very, very brief kind of look at what is colonial development, what's the post-colonial alternative to that, and the danger of the post-colonial alternative being just walk away and do nothing, which we're suggesting is not a great response. Okay, so we'll go back to Tom.
Great, thanks, Mark. So what we're going to do next is basically, because our discussion today is around power, the use of power, right? So the colonial mindset is we have the power and we have the right to use our power over other people. Post-colonial critique of that is we should not be using our power at all. Now, I'm going to suggest that Jesus has a third way where he does have a lot of power, but he's using it in quite a different way. So I've just chosen about 5 Bible verses here, which we are going to go into breakout rooms. We're going to go into 5 breakout rooms, and basically they're going to be numbered here on the screen. We're also going to paste in the chat box. So each breakout room will be assigned a verse. So what I would like you to do, we'll have about 4 or 5 minutes in the breakout rooms. So there'll be a group of maybe, looks like 4 people per breakout room, about that. So what I'd like you guys to do is just discuss that verse. If you have your Bibles there, you can also look at it, look at the context around that verse, and discuss what does that mean for us as Christians in a post-colonial world, around questions of power. What is Jesus telling us about power, how to use our power, how not to use our power? Yeah, what is Jesus telling us about power? So Mark is just going to paste this in the chat box very quickly, and we're going to, I think, randomly allocate you guys to breakout rooms, and we'll send you a message maybe when there's 60 seconds to go. So yeah, just like you to have a quick look at that verse, look at the context around it if you like, and yeah, just discuss what Jesus has to say about the use of power, what that might mean for us in our lives today. So
just checking, can everyone see in your chat box, can you see that set of verses? Richard and Cheryl, yep, thank you. Okay, so you can all see that. And now when you go into the breakout rooms, we want group 1, and you'll see the number come up on your screen if you're going into group 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. Group 1 will do the first verse, group 2 the second, and so forth. So just take a note of the number of the group that you're going into. Then you'll be able to go to the chat box and say, okay, we're group 3, we're going to do the third verse. And the question again, Tom, is?
So the question is, what does Jesus say about the use of power? How we should be using our power or not using our power?
What does Jesus say about the use of power? How to use our power or not? Now, I'm just checking here.
Mark, I'm just a little concerned that when you set the breakout rooms up, the chat box may disappear. I don't know if it will or not, but it
won't, Richard. As long as now that we've put it in before the breakout rooms, you'll be able to access that when you're in your breakout room. That's why we've put it in there now.
Okay, fine.
Pretty sure that'll still be there. Now,
I say too, Mark, people need to turn their microphones back on to talk to each other in the group.
Correct. Very good. People need to turn their microphones on. That's great. Thank you, Irene, for that. Now, Irene, I think you have the power for breakout rooms rather than me. If you want me to do it, you can make me a co-host, or if you want to do it, that's fine.
Can you tell me how many people? Did you notice that? I think, Tom, you said how many people there were?
You can put maybe 4 people per
Yeah, but I want to know how many people there are altogether.
So we've got 22.
Okay.
So David's group has 8 people there.
So we'll be making
room unto themselves.
We'll be making 5 breakout rooms, Irene.
Yeah.
So 5 is the relevant number.
Yeah. So I'll open them and everyone will disappear.
And yep, that's great. Okay.
So we'll be back in about 5 minutes. We'll send you a message.
Great.
You read that?
Welcome back. I dare say, like most breakout rooms, there was a degree of chaos. But hopefully you at least got the verse read and you had a brief discussion about it with respect to power. So thank you for doing that and welcome back. And I'm going to share screen again now to go back to
your fingernails.
what Tom thinks. And so just again, the Zoom thing of now is a good time to hit mute for a little while until we ask you more stuff. Okay.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Now, I'm sorry I didn't warn you this beforehand, but I would like all of the groups to report back very briefly, like 60 seconds or less, about the verse they were reading and any insight or anything they had to report that, what Jesus is telling us about power, the use of power, and what that means for us, in a post-colonial world. So sorry to spring that on you without warning, but could we go to group 1 first, who had the verse Matthew 5:5, So anybody in group 1, just unmute yourself, please, and describe a little bit of what you discussed on it.
We're playing chicken. We didn't talk much, but we did say we observed that even in like business world, that those, I guess we had talked about perhaps meekness is not weakness, but true humility. And even in the business world, or in the secular world rather, those who are doing really effective teamwork and not assuming that they're the best, and those who are working together and working collaboratively are often the people who kind of come out on top in the end. So I guess meekness is good. It's not about being weak and getting walked over. And I just had a question was, what does it even mean to inherit the earth? I don't know.
Thanks, Steph. Great. So we'll go on to group 2. You had Matthew 18:18. So anybody from group 2? Don't be shy. Don't play chicken.
I thought Phil had the greatest sense of wisdom, and I wonder if we can dump it on him, because he's had a lot of personal experience that you probably know about, Mark. So, Phil, are you there?
Yeah, not too sure that I've got much wisdom. I guess I'd always seen that as two different approaches. You know, your binding is sort of the opposite to loosening. So I'd always understood that to mean we're being offered a choice between two things, A or B. Do you want to bind or do you want to loose? And maybe, in fact, it's actually a challenge to not misuse our power at all, whether that be in binding or loosing.
Yep. Good thought. Good thought.
Great. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to group 3. Sorry, we don't have much time for pingbacks, but yeah, maybe in person later at church. Yeah, so group 3, Matthew 20:27.
I'll say something unless Paul or Linda want to jump in. But yeah, talked a bit about, I guess, some of the contextual stuff in terms of some slaves and some of the contexts that the Bible's written in, sort of being actually quite sort of skilled or not necessarily being the lowest of the low. But otherwise, yeah, I guess the focus was on serving being a way of, yeah, sort of using power, like called to serve, but then also sort of a reference to sort of trying to be less rather than more, and that sort of reference, yeah, in terms of how to serve.
Ladies speak.
Right.
No.
Group 4, which was the group I was in, Matthew 21:12.
Hello, we're group 4. We talked about Jesus, kind of the idea of him using righteous anger rather than kind of violence. And some people talked about how it's Jesus actually, maybe it was like premeditated. It wasn't kind of an angry outburst. He actually had kind of planned to go into the courts and turn over the tables and so forth. And we talked about when maybe in our own lives, when we can be kind of assertive, like what types of issues it's our responsibility to be assertive and kind of practice righteous anger. And we talked about some examples like caring for the environment, who who doesn't have a voice, so we can be the voice for people who can't share theirs, or for vulnerable people, or that sort of thing, people who we kind of can be a voice for. Yes.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, group 5, Matthew 26:53.
We discussed just how, whilst Jesus had at disposal his power to call the 12 legions, it wasn't in the way of the kingdom for that time and purpose. And so it was about the judicious use of the power at hand, and it links in with the Philippians passage where Jesus set aside that authority in order to become the servant. So, and we talked about not understanding and fully appreciating the cultural context either, which is just significantly complex too.
Right. Terrific. Thanks, guys. And I know that, that's very, very brief study of power, Jesus' use of power. But yeah, just to unpack that a little bit of, the principles, I guess, that I use when I'm thinking about these questions. So Gandhi had a very famous quote, famous talisman, which I put on screen. I won't read it out. But basically, it's around this idea of when you're dealing with a situation and you're in doubt, consider what are the interests of the poorest or the weakest or the most marginalized person that you know, and what would they want you to do? Put yourself in their shoes. And so I find that with that, the situation of the 15-year-old girl, she was the most marginalized person in that situation. So I was trying to think primarily from her perspective, what would she want? What's the best situation for her? Also, there's not a one-size-fits-all response, as we were seeing in those passages. Jesus sometimes uses his power in a very ostentatious way, like in the temple. Sometimes he doesn't use his power, like in not calling the legions of angels, and he exhorts us to be meek. So there's not a one-size-fits-all response, and we need to be open to changing our approach based on the feedback that we're getting from people. Yes, there's a humility. So Jesus recognized that his power was not from himself, even though he was God, but he recognized that his power is from God, not directly from himself. And definitely that's what we need to do. We have a lot of power through our white skin, through our money, our education, so forth. We need to recognize that ultimately that it should not be the source of our power. The source of our power should be from God. And all of those things, the white skin, the money, etc., that is not, we can't really take any credit for that. So to try to remain meek, humble, to not inflate our own sense of ego. And finally, I think giving genuine decision-making power to local friends is key. And so that, for me, is what I was taking out of that verse of Jesus delegating a lot of authority to his disciples, saying, you have the power to bind, what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and so forth. I certainly don't know exactly what that means, but I think Jesus did delegate a lot of power and responsibility to his local friends. And so that's obviously, I'm not Jesus, but that's the sort of principles that I'm trying to use in my work in India, is giving a lot of power and authority to the people working with me. So we'll just go back very briefly to that example of the underage marriage, and then we'll look at one more case study before we kind of wrap it up. So basically I tried options. I didn't consider option 1 much because I felt I do have a responsibility to do something. I tried option 2. I tried convincing them, had quite a lengthy debate. I asked my Indian roommate, Rajesh, he tried convincing them, and we weren't able to, basically. And so then in the end, I did threaten to call the police. And it actually worked in the sense of they cancelled the marriage, they called the marriage off, and our friendship remained intact. I'm still very good friends with our family. So it's interesting for me because it's not the sort of thing that I was expecting that I would do, is threaten to call the police on my friends. But in that, after thinking about it, praying about it, talking about it with my Indian friends, with my parents, I decided, yes, I do have to threaten to use force in a sense. And that again comes back to that Gandhi's talisman of obviously I am much more powerful in this family, but I'm specifically looking out for the interests of the least powerful person in this family, who is this girl. I think because you can keep going through this slide. Because we're short on time, we probably won't do this case study. But again,
I think it's okay.
It's fine. Okay, we'll do it. Okay, great. So we will do this case study. So here's another situation then for you guys to chew on, to think about, and respond in the chat box. So early on in the pandemic, in the second wave especially, there was a lot of economic strife, people really struggling because they're not able to work because of lockdowns, and lots of people came to me asking for help. So I want to ask you to imagine yourself in that situation. What would you do? What would you do? So again, you can put down just your your gut reaction, because that's a complex situation, but do you do nothing? Because any response can create dependency, and definitely we are in danger of that. Do you distribute cooked meals? Do you like set up a community kitchen and distribute cooked meals? Do you distribute uncooked food grains like flour, rice, lentils, and that sort of thing to let people cook their own food? Or do you distribute money and kind of trust people to be able to use the money well? Yeah, so again, it's a very, very short time, but yes, I'm interested to hear your thoughts just briefly in the chat box. Which sort of option of these are you initially attracted to? What's your gut feel? And Chris, I think, has responded already. Cook extra of your own and share with others. Yes, that's lovely. In fact, often it's the other way around. Lots of people cook extra and I eat at other people's houses. But yes, Irene, 3, distributing uncooked food grains. Yes. Well, you can kind of see the picture there of, that I did end up doing option 3 primarily. But yeah, great. Others, please keep responding in the chat box. What sort of, 3, okay, yeah. What things are you, seems like it should be a collaboratively explored solution. Absolutely, totally agree. Does buying food for the people mean that food will not be available for others? Excellent question. Not so much in the sense of there's still plenty of food availability in the market. It was just people were not able to afford it, so there wasn't really a supply chain crunch. But yes, good thought. Yeah, great. Keep responding. Keep responding. We can move on to the next slide now. Yeah, so just feel free to keep going. Yes, perhaps 4, it empowers people, the receiver, to make their own choices. Excellent. So just to briefly explain what I did do, you can feel free to keep responding. I did start by asking people what would they like? Would they prefer cooked food, uncooked food, money? And I was initially kind of expecting that people would prefer money because it's more flexible and it feels more empowering. But again, I was mainly asking women, not men. I was mainly asking women, and they basically all said we would prefer uncooked food over any of the other options. So I went for that. And the way we did it as well, there's lots of ways you can do a distribution. The way we did it was we asked local friends, can you help run a food distribution from your house? They say yes, then we'll give them the responsibility basically of you guys prepare a list of 30 or 50 families, and you guys help actually do most of the packing, and we'll distribute house to house. So we tried to do it in a much more dignified way than just pulling up in the back of a car outside a slum and distributing it from the car, which unfortunately many other NGOs were doing, which creates chaos, and it's a very undignified way of people are scrambling, competing with each other, shouting, whereas we were trying to do house-to-house distributions and in a much more personal way. So yeah, great, thanks, good responses, guys. And we'll head over to Mark then to kind of wrap it up with what implications this has for us in Australia before we go on to Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So yes, what are some of the implications of this use of power, how to use power well in Australia? So I think the first thing we'd like to point out is, and this is really directly, I suppose, when a number of our friends say to us, why are you doing anything in India at all, right? You have no right to be there, just get out of there, focus on stuff in Australia. We recognise there's a lot of poverty in Australia, there's a lot of injustice in Australia, there's a lot of structural problems, we do. But we also want to say to our friends, we need to recognise the scale of the need between Australia and India or many other countries in the world is vastly, vastly different. The scale is enormously different. And just as a way to point that out, our friend Kamran, who's a good friend of Tom and mine, he does sewing work, embroidering these beautiful cloths for sale. He earns about 50 cents an hour, right? And he's trained for years to do that. Tom comes to Australia the other day. He gets a job as a COVID tester. He's down at Mount Gravatt testing people for COVID. He's getting paid $29 an hour. Now you can say, yeah, but food's more expensive in Australia, rent's more expensive in Australia. Yes, it is, but it's about 2 or 3 times more expensive. It's not 60 times more expensive. So we just want to point out there, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, not to say we have no right to do anything in the developing world anymore, because the scale of the need is vastly, vastly different. Secondly, this coming out of Gandhi's statement there, to before dismissing development overseas as colonial, ask yourself, what would that young man or woman want of me? Right? What would that poor person that Tom's just told me about, or that I've read about, what would they want me to do? And I can almost guarantee that they would say, do not walk away and do nothing. Please come listen to us, consult with us, consider our opinion, use your power appropriately, give me as much power as you can, but do not walk away and do nothing. That is not the response that the poor, the most marginalized people would want from you or from me. And then finally, that's about overseas, that's fine. But finally, in those overseas contexts, it's important to find people you trust who are doing good work humbly in partnership with local people. Now, there are organisations that do excellent work, that do it in partnership. They partner with local people, they consider their opinions, they share power as much as they can. There are organisations that do that really well. There's some that do that really poorly, are very top down, very patriarchal and so forth. But you can do that work to find out which are the organisations that do that well. And I'd suggest to support them as best you can, however you can. And finally, in Australia, our job is to find those people who are disempowered in our own context, those people who are without power, that haven't got a voice, or they have a voice that's not being listened to, and to listen to them. So one of the most powerful things we've found is to go to those who are disempowered and to listen to them, listen to their opinion and what they want. How do they want things to be different? And there's many examples of that in Australia. I've just put one photo there. Many of you will be familiar with the refugees, asylum seekers that have been imprisoned in Australia for 8 years. Just awful, awful torture of these men. Our job is to listen to them and to find out what they want. How do they want that we advocate for them? There's many other examples of people who are disempowered in Australia, and our job, we would suggest, is primarily to first go and listen to them to find out how they want us to use the power that we have. Right, now it's time for questions. So we'd like anybody that's got a question about any of that to unmute and ask away. This is where I will...
we're wondering, Mark, it's Rich and Cheryl here.
Yep.
What happened to that slum that had the threat of demolition that you alluded to at the beginning of the talk?
Oh, okay. What happened there? It's a good question, Richard. It was a very interesting one where that was a slum of about 7,000 people, mainly Muslims. The government wanted to demolish the slum. They gave them 6 days notice of the demolition. So we did that. We went in and we asked people, what do you want to do? And in the end, we ran big community meetings with a couple of hundred people saying, what do you want to do? How do you want to respond to this? And by and large, people said, look, we're willing to go because we know we live on illegal land, but not in 6 days. That's unreasonable. So we want to challenge that time frame in the court. And so can you get some lawyers for us? So I kind of ran between lawyers and the community leaders, set up these various meetings. In the end, we challenged it in the Delhi High Court. And I was this go-between person, just kind of translating between the lawyers and the residents. In the end, we had a win in court. We got it delayed for several months and we got legal title to land in another place before they were evicted. So that actually transpired pretty well. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Thanks, Mark.
Anything else?
David,
There's a question in chat.
Yeah.
Yep.
So David has asked, if I'm not going to go and live there, is there a place for short-term assistance visits? So yeah, that's a great question. I would say, yeah, there probably is some place for it. Obviously, short-term is difficult in terms of language, in terms of carbon footprint and so forth. But I think there is still some place for it. Maybe especially if you have a skill that's really needed there. And I would say, especially if you are open to the long term, then a short term really makes a lot of sense to explore that. But yeah, there probably are some contexts where short terms can be really helpful. Do you have any advice on how we can help to improve the inequality in what people get paid across countries? That's a big one. Do you want to go for that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the structural things that I think we really need to change is to have a global minimum wage that's set on what you can purchase. And that needs to be set at an amount that you need to live as a minimum, right? Because at the moment, people in the developing world are working a whole day and it's not enough to actually feed their family. And that is a terrible injustice, I think. So just like we have a minimum wage in Australia, we need a minimum global wage. And we have these kinds of standards across the world. You know, there's standards of, pollution and so forth that are global standards. We need a global minimum wage is my own take on that. Now, that's not going to happen in a hurry because there's going to be a lot of people that hate that idea, but that's my personal view on it. And so I would advocate that we push for that kind of thing. Meanwhile, of course, buy things that are ethically produced. So read labels on products, all of those things, to try to buy not just the cheapest, but the one that's going to give the person who produced it a decent wage.
Another question has come in from Chris. Do you ever despair, and how do you deal with that and significant setbacks? Yeah, really good question. I think for me, I really like the quote from Dorothy Day, nobody has the right to feel hopeless because there's too much work to do. So yeah, I think I haven't really felt despair yet. I definitely feel down at times. I feel like, gosh, things are really hard. But I find personally that those are the times where I'm thrown back on God more and thrown back on, I can't do much myself. I really need God. Where are you, God? I need you here. Yeah, so, and I guess it's good for me that while I've had my plenty of failures, I've also had a reasonable number of successes, and just seeing small stories of hope and change, even if it's things as simple as people, learning how to read or getting well in hospital. Even those really simple things do help sustain me.
Well, that young woman not getting married, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
And hopefully seeing her flourish. Yeah, good questions. That's a good top-down solution. Or you were advocating for a bottom-up approach. Is there a bottom-up solution for wage inequality? Okay, yeah, good question. Tom can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are things like Mark was saying, ethical trade, fair trade, that sort of thing. I guess what I try to do is I employ a bunch of Indian friends, and I try to pay them a fair wage, a living wage. So I'm going to be selfish here and say, you can donate to me because I can do that. I'm creating jobs that are, are a fair wage, and they're doing socially useful things rather than, this embroidery work is really, it's agony. It's terrible for your eyes. It's terrible for your back. And ultimately it's creating a product which, like, it looks beautiful, but it really doesn't serve much function in the world. So yeah, I guess bottom-up approaches are donating to NGOs that are helping people create good businesses, good jobs. Yeah.
I suppose another bottom-up approach would be like a union, for those embroiderers to get together and say, well, we're not going to do that for that wage. We're all not going to do that work until the salary goes up. Well, history is replete with those kind of movements that have worked, but it's also replete with those kind of movements that haven't worked and people have been absolutely crushed. And what you often find with the poor is they just can't afford to take risk, right? They're living so close to the margin, they can't afford to take risk. So even if they're only earning $2 a day, they'd say that's better than nothing. I'm going to, so our friend Dave Andrews has a saying, what's worse than people being exploited by a multinational? Well, what's worse is people not being exploited by a multinational, so your 80 rupees a day is better than nothing. So yeah, what to say? Now, Chris also put in the chat earlier, recommended a book which has just come out and Kathy has just read, called Fight Like Jesus. So a friend of ours, a Servants Connected guy, Jason Porterfield, talks about a non-violent way of doing life. And it's a really lovely look at Jesus during the Passion Week and how he demonstrated non-violence, not just on one occasion, but right through that week. So I would thoroughly recommend that book. Paul.
Yeah, so I just listened to C.B. Samuel a week or so ago talk about the pandemic, and he observed that Gandhi, when he lived in his little ashram or whatever it was, deliberately invited a leper to come and live beside him. And every day he would go and care for this person as part of his daily routine. And so he developed a practice of being available to a very vulnerable poor person. And it's very easy when we think about all these problems to go to data, to take away the humanness out of it all and just talk about the problem. Whereas Gandhi recognised he needed to keep that human, and his leper next door kept him focused on the person, not just the advocacy issue that he was involved in. And so I think here in Australia, we need to find people who we're willing to be servants to so that we can then advocate and be involved in broader issues. I think that's what Jesus was about in lots of ways.
Definitely. I totally resonate with that, you know, the larger systemic approach and the grassroots approach, they should go hand in hand.
Yes. Okay, anybody else? Okay. All right. Terrific, folks. So thanks very much. We're not going to, I guess Tom and I will stick around on this call for a while. If you want to stick around and ask another question or say something, you're absolutely welcome. But I've also got an evaluation form that I'd like to give you. It's optional, but it would help us. So it's going to go into your chat box now. Chat to everyone. Okay, can you see that in your chat box? And can you click on that and see if a form comes up for you? Again, the wonders of technology, eh? We didn't have to print it. All right, you can see it. Now, it's totally optional. The last question of your name and a contact is completely voluntary. You don't have to put anything there. So if you'd fill that out, that'd be great. And then we can kind of get a sense of what did you like, what didn't you like. But I've enjoyed it. It's been fun, and thank you for joining. It's been lovely to see old friends and new.
David has just asked a question of how long would we be going back for. So I'm kind of at this stage hoping to be in India for most of my life, and Mark and Kath, I think maybe for at least another 5-10 years, something like that. So indefinite.
I figure I've got probably another 10 useful years in my life, and might as well be in India for most of those. But let's see how we go, though. Mr. Modi may have different ideas. Would anybody else like to say anything or ask anything before we hand it back to Irene to close us off?
Okay, thank you so much, Mark and Tom, for your preparation and thinking about how we can do this interactively and join in and keep it interesting. Well done. And to everyone, next first Sunday of the month, which is when we have Theology on Tap, we hope to get together, but of course, none of us know how it's all going to go. So just keep your eye on Facebook, or we'll email out and either do it again as a Zoom or meet again at the Lord Stanley Hotel. So many thanks for joining us, and stick around and talk to Tom and Mark if you'd like to do that. Blessings.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tom and Mark, from Wendy.
Thanks, Wendy. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom and Mark. It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Irene.
Righto, thanks, guys.